There comes a point in the builder's journey where your biggest problem is no longer lack of inspiration, it is not lack of ambition either. And most of the time, it's not the lack of options. It is something more subtle than that, and in some ways, more dangerous. You have too many ideas, too many directions, too many things that could work, too many paths that look interesting for a moment, too many models you can imagine yourself stepping into. And because of that, your life starts filling with beginnings that never harden into reality. You think, you plan, you map things out, you feel those little surges of excitement when something clicks mentally. You imagine where each path could go. You can almost see the future shape of it. For a moment, it feels like clarity. For a moment, it feels like movement. For a moment, you feel like you finally found the angle that makes everything make sense for you. And then, suddenly, before anything becomes real, another idea appears. A new opportunity, a cleaner model, a smarter move, maybe a more aligned path for you, a more scalable path, a faster way, a path that seems, at least for a few hours, like the ones that will finally make everything click in your life. So you shift again, again, and again. Not always in obvious ways, sometimes outwardly. You still look committed. Sometimes from the outside, it still looks like you are working on the same thing. But insidely, your attention keeps getting redistributed. Your focus keeps splitting. Your energy keeps leaking into possibility instead of proof. And that is where a lot of builders quietly lose years. Not because they are incapable, not because they are lazy, but because they become addicted to ideas and disconnect from evidence. Ideas are seductive for a reason. They create energy instantly. The moment a new idea enters your mind, something wakes up. You feel movement. You feel this freshness, this possibility. You can suddenly imagine yourself becoming a different person, a person who is more focused, more successful, more clear. The new idea seems to solve the old friction. It feels like a reset, a second chance, a cleaner beginning. And for a little while, that feeling is real. That is why people keep chasing it, because idea energy can feel a lot like process. It gives you momentum in the imagination. But the problem is this: an idea can make you feel movement without requiring any proof. And that is pretty dangerous, because the inner world starts rewarding you before reality responded at all. You get emotional payments without real world confirmation. You feel smart because you saw the opportunity. You feel strategic because you can explain it. You feel productive because you wrote the plan. You feel close because you can imagine the outcome. But none of that makes the thing work. None of that means you will stay with it. None of that means the market cares. None of that means it fits your actual life. And none of that means you have touched reality. And builders need to learn this distinction early. Idea energy is not evidence, it is only possibility. That does not make ideas bad. Ideas matter. They are the raw material. Every real things begin at something imagined at first. But if you build your life around emotional highs of new ideas, you become a collector of beginnings, not a builder of realities. You become someone who is constantly mentally active but rarely structurally committed. And that pattern is exhausting, because from the inside it can feel like you are always doing something. You're always thinking, refining, exploring. But when you look at your actual life, very little has had enough time, enough repetition, or enough contact with reality to become solid. That is where the hidden cost begins. On the surface, chasing ideas can look harmless, even intelligent. You tell yourself you are exploring, staying open, thinking creatively, keeping options alive. And again, some exploration is healthy, some exploration is necessary. In the early phase, you do need the room to test, to look around, to understand yourself better, to understand where your effort might actually fit. But there's a point where idea chasing stops being exploration and becomes avoidance. Because every new idea gives you permission to delay commitment to the current path. It gives you a reason not to stay in the awkward middle. The boring reps, the unclear seasons, this the slow compounding phase where nothing looks impressive yet. You can escape all of that by moving your attention to something newer, something cleaner, something untested. And because the new thing still is untested, it still feels pure, untouched by disappointment, untouched by friction, untouched by evidence. So you transfer your hope again. That seems harmless in the moment, but the cost compounds. Every time you leave too early, you interrupt proof. Every time you interrupt proof, you lose feedback. And every time you lose feedback, you stay whack. Every time you stay whack, your self-trust gets weaker. And over time, a quiet pattern forms. You become someone who always has ideas but very little evidence. And if I have learned one thing over the last 5 years of me being self-employed, is that that is painful. Because eventually the mind starts turning on itself. So you begin to wonder why you keep doing this, why you can see so many possibilities but build so few realities, why you always feel like you are close but never actually in motion for long enough, why your inner world feels full but your outer life feels still underbuilt. That frustration is real. And it usually has less to do with intelligence than people think. It has more to do with your relationship to proof. I think most ambitious people know this pattern in some form. That moment when a new path appears and it feels like some kind of relief, right? Not just inspiration, a real relief. Because the new idea seems to remove the tension of the current one. If the current effort has uncertain results, the new one still carries fantasy. That is a powerful pull. Not because the new thing is actually better, but because the distance protects it. Distance keeps it clean. Reality has not touched it. And that is one of the more difficult lessons in the whole builder's path. Many ideas feel stronger from a distance than they do in practice. Distance protects them. Reality tests them. That is why the real shift is not finding fewer ideas. You're probably not going to become someone who suddenly stops generating possibilities. That is not the goal. The goal is learning to stop honoring every idea equally. That is the shift. Because once you stop treating every new idea as a command, you become calmer. You stop getting emotionally dragged around every fresh possibility. You stop behaving as if every mental spark deserves a restriction of your direction. You start asking different questions. Not, is this exciting? Not, could this work in theory? But where is the proof? What has reality actually confirmed for me? What signals already exist? This is a much steadier way to build. And honestly, it is one of the clearest difference between people who stay stuck in a potential and people who start creating momentum, because proof changes the conversation. An idea says this could work, but proof says this is showing signs of working. An idea says this would fit me. Proof says when I did this, reality responded. An idea says the market seems interesting, but proof says people here are already reacting to something I do. An idea says this could become a business, but proof says I have seen attention gather, trust form, value transfer, or money move. Both matter, don't get me wrong, but they do not deserve the same weight. Early builders often reserve that. They give too much authority to ideas and too little authority to proof. And that reverses their progress. Because they keep abandoning signals to pursue possibilities. And possibility is endless. That means you stay psychologically busy forever without becoming clearer. Proof interrupts that cycle. Proof says, stay here, look closer. Something is happening. Learn from this. That is what builders need. They need the discipline to stop wandering around every time a new path appears and to instead ask whether the current path has already given them enough signals to deserve deeper focus. That is a major question, and it changes outcomes, because once you start organizing your effort around proof instead of novelty, you stop resetting yourself all the time. Here is one reason people resist this shift. Proof is less glamorous than ideas. Ideas are expansive. Proof is narrowing. Ideas let you imagine everything. Proof tells you what is actually happening. Maybe the thing you wanted people to value is not the thing they are responding to. Maybe the offer you thought was clever is not clear enough. Maybe the content you were most emotionally attached to is not that what creates signals. Maybe the simple things work better than the sophisticated ones. Maybe your edge is different from what you imagined. All of that can boost your ego a little bit. Because proof does not flatter fantasy, it sharpens it. But this is exactly why proof is so valuable. It removes fog. It shows you where to place more weight. It saves you from spending years building around assumption that never got tested. A lot of people say they want clarity, but what they really want is reassurance. They want their imagination to be confirmed without being corrected. Proof does not always do that. Sometimes proof is corrective, but sometimes it directs you to another direction. Sometimes tell you that your cleaner theory is weaker than your simpler reality. But correction is a gift if your goal is to build something real. Because real builders do not need endless emotional comfort. They need better contact with your reality. And better contact with reality is what makes paths more solid. That is the core of this whole episode. Builders need proof, not constant novelty. Proof can look like someone paying you, someone repeatedly engaging with your work, a piece of content clearly landing, a service solving a real problem, or people returning, a sales conversation converting, an offer being understood quickly, a message resonating without long explanation. Proof is grounded. It is measured in some way. It comes from contact. It forces honesty. And because it forces honesty, it gives you something ideas never can. Direction. And direction you can actually trust. So if you have been drifting lately, if your attention keeps splitting every week in a new direction, if you keep feeling mentally busy but not deeply grounded, this is probably what is happening. You're probably giving more authority to what excites you than what reality is confirming you. And that keeps you in a state of emotional motion without structural accumulation. At some point, that has to change. And at some point, you have to become more loyal to signals than stimulation, more loyal to evidence than imagination, more loyal to what is becoming real than to what is still only interesting. That's not a loss of creativity. It is the discipline that lets creativity turn into something solid. Once you start taking proof seriously, the whole way you build begins to change. You stop asking, what else could I do every few days, and you start asking, what is already showing signs of life? That question matters because it pulls you out of the mental wandering and puts you back into contact with reality. And reality is where builders either stabilize or disappear. Because ideas multiply endlessly. Proof does not. Proof is narrower, more grounded, less brethren to fantasy. But that is exactly why it matters. Proof is a real world signal that tells you something is actually working. Not perfectly, not fully, but actually working. Someone pays, someone comes back, a piece of content lands, a message resonates quickly, a service solves a real problem. An offer is understood without endless explanation. Even your own behavior can be proved. If you are showing up consistently, finishing things, publishing, reaching out, staying with the work longer than usual, that matters too. Because before external proof becomes strong, internal proof often has to come first. Proof that you are no longer only interested, proof that you are really participating. And that is where a lot of people miss what is right in front of them. They dismiss small proof because it does not look dramatic. They say it's just one good response, it's just one sale, it's just one post that did well. But builders need to respect small signals because small signals are often how reality first answers back. If you keep overlooking it, you stay trapped in abstraction. You keep searching for something bigger while ignoring the one thing that already showed signs of being real. That is the shift. You stop giving all your authority to ideas and start giving more authority to evidence. Because ideas tell you what could happen. Proof tells you what is already happened. And those two things do not deserve the same weight. Once you understand that you become calmer, less reactive, less tempted by every fresh possibility, not because ideas disappear, but because they stop controlling you, you stop treating every new thought like a command. You stop rebuilding your direction every time something exciting passes through. Instead, you start asking better questions. What is working? What keeps repeating? Where is the trust forming? What part of my effort is actually creating movement right now? This is how builders start getting stronger. And I want you to get stronger. Not by becoming less creative, but by becoming less scattered. And proof is often less glamorous than ideas. This is why people resist it. Ideas are expansive. proof is narrowing. Ideas let you imagine everything. Proof tells you where to focus, and that can bruise your ego a little bit. Maybe the simple things work better than the sophisticated ones, right? Maybe your real edge is more practical than impressive. Maybe the things people actually respond to are not the things you were most emotionally attached to. But that is not bad news. And this is pretty important to know. That is useful because that proves something and this removes the fog of your head. It saves you from building around assumption that never got tested. It shows you where to place more weight. And if your goal is to build something real, that matters more than feeling impressive in your own head. So what do you do when you find those proof? You study it and you stay with it a little longer than your restless mind wants you to. You write it down. You look at what actually happened and what actually landed for the people you want to land it. What made the value clear? What part of your thinking, your skills, or your execution connected? Because if you do not study your own signals, you waste it. You turn something useful into a moment instead of a direction. And that is one of the deepest builder's mistakes. Being more loyal to your internal narrative than to your external signals. You keep insisting on the version you want to be true, even when reality is nudging you somewhere else. Maybe your audience responds more strongly to one angle, but you keep resisting it because another angle feels cooler. Maybe your simplest offer gets the best response, but you keep trying to replace it with something more impressive. Maybe the market is showing you something real, but your ego wants something more glamorous. If you cannot follow proof, you stay fragmented. Builders need enough humility to let evidence shape direction. Not blindly, but seriously. That means that the thing that works needs to be accepted. And it might be simpler than what you imagine it. Might be quieter or less dramatic, more direct. And that is not failure, that is refine. And if you do not have strong proof yet, the answer is not to try out more ideas. The answer is more contact. More contact with people, with the market, with publishing, with delivering, responding, and repetition. Because proof comes from contact. If there is no proof yet, ask yourself a more honest question. Where am I still too theoretically? Where am I still mostly thinking instead of testing? Where can I create the fastest, honest contact with the true reality? That is where this whole episode lands. Major ambition stops chasing stimulation and starts chasing evidence. It stops restarting around every exciting thought. It starts building around signals because the long game is not built on endless possibilities. It's built on accumulation. Accumulation of skills, of trust, of proof. And none of that happens if you keep leaving every path before reality has a chance to answer you. So ask yourself one honest question at the end of this video. What proof already exists in my life that I have been overlooking because I was too busy chasing the next ideal? Simply start here. Stay there a little longer and let reality, not novelty, shape your next move.